Okay, we are, I think I'm doing it, yep. All right, welcome everybody. Actually, we're supposed to do our opening in prayer before I started doing that. We are already off in our thing. Russell, would you like to open us up with a word of prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for this time that we come together and look at your word and look at these spiritual gifts and hope that you can apply it to our lives and we can use them to reach other people to bless the ministry. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
We're still doing skill gifts. I'll be honest, I am really excited about getting to spiritual gifts, like, the big flashy ones where we're calling down thunder from heaven and setting heathens on fire and such. I'm looking forward to that, but I'm actually saving those for last. I really feel like, especially in the area we're at, in the part of the country we're at, in the culture that we live in, that we are seeing a lot of people who are under spiritual attack, And it's sad because most of them don't even know what to do about it because they don't realize it's a spiritual attack. You know what I'm saying? They just think it's life being like this, or it's just depression, or it's just anxiety. And while sometimes those have a physical component, there's almost always a spiritual component to that. There's also something going on in the spirit world. But for right now, we are on the skill gifts. Although I am going to talk a little bit, especially when we get down to these, because I had a lot more fun studying. I really hope we get to poverty, because I had so much fun with poverty today. I know. Two of my favorite people in the whole world were voluntarily poor. And I'll save that because if we don't get to them, then I don't want to spoil it. But it's just a neat gifting. So we're starting with administration. So somebody get to Luke chapter 14 for me, and someone else get to Acts chapter 6, and we'll do those one at a time. Whoever gets it there, just go ahead and read it. Acts 14, 28 through 30. I'd say I could write neater next time, but there's not much chance I can.
Okay. For which of you intending to build a house, settle not down first and count up the cost, whether he has sufficient to finish it. Less happily after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it began to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish.
All right, I love that verse. If somebody says, we're going to go build a house, we're going to go build a tower, we're going to go build a building, and they don't have the money to finish it, everybody mocks them for it. I think I preached on that one Sunday that North Korea has a great big, huge, space-age looking building that you can see from the South Korean border, and they built it to show South Korea how awesome they were with their building, but they didn't have the money to finish the inside, so it's actually just an empty structure sitting there, as a monument to man's stupidity, right? One of the things in the spiritual gifts inventories is it has leadership and it has administration. Leadership and administration are very different things. Sometimes in the secular world, you'll be in an office where somebody is in a leadership position, but they're only an administrator, right? Or you'll have somebody in an administrative position that's more of a leader and not a great administrator. Now, somebody tell me, what do you think it looks like if somebody's a good administrator but not a good leader and they're in a leadership position? Like, a CEO of a company, would you say they'd be leadership or an administrator? They'd be leadership, right? Because a CEO needs to have vision, right? A leader needs to say, okay, this is where we're going, right? So the administrators, though, are going to be your managers. Now, what happens a lot of times that you see is you have somebody who's a good leader and a bad administrator, right? And they're like this guy in Luke that they say, hey, we're going to go here and do this thing. But because they don't have that administrative backing behind it, all of a sudden they come up short in the planning, right? Because they're really good at saying, let's start something, but they're not really good at finishing it. That's why you have to have people that are good at administrating to do that. Sometimes, though, if you have someone who's an administrator, but they're put in a leadership position, they really just kind of try to hold the fort because that's what they're, set to do, and that can be frustrating too. I've worked for some people and you're just like, well, we need to do this, that, and the other. They can't make a decision on anything because really their mode is to just kind of maintain what's already there. They're not good at building out. You have people that are good at, plugging ahead, and you have people that are good at maintaining what you have. So good administrators are rendered inept by a lack of authority because, again, an administrator should work with a leader, and a leader should work with an administrator. Every now and then, you have people that have that same gift. As it happens in our church, I know Russell has leadership and administration on both of his? Trying to think, looking around the room, dun, 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 dun. I know a couple of people. We actually have a couple of people that have leadership and administration, which in my experience has been rare, but here we have more of that. And that's good, because then you have somebody that both, can look ahead and plan ahead and lead people ahead, but also has that structure component that makes sure that things don't fall apart. Did anybody notice a difference in the service this week without my lead administrator here? Did anybody, is there a subtle, yeah.
Everything fell apart.
Well, Kristen knows especially because, as I told Deb, I was like, I didn't realize how many times a day I say, Deb, come look at this, or Deb, what about this? Because now I'm texting Kristen or calling Kristen saying, hey, I need you to look at this, or proofread this, or check this out for me, or what about this? And I usually do that to Debbie, and Kristen, well, she can't fire me, right? But she was not happy with the lack of administrative support when Debbie's gone, so apparently Debbie can never, ever leave. So, but good leaders fail if they don't have good administrators. That's what we're talking about there in Luke. That we're going to build something. Now, in Luke, we're taking a little out of context by saying that, because in that particular passage, he's actually talking about the cost of following Christ, right? Because people say, oh, I'm going to serve Jesus. I don't want to get too far into this. But there's a modern pulling away from that whole thought of, we're trying to get you to the altar that one time to make this decision where you say, I accept Jesus Christ into my heart, and then boom, you're saved forever, you're good, right? Because biblical Christianity does not look like that. There are no altar calls in the Bible. There's no, piano playing in the background, as Paul says to the people gathered. If right now you want to receive the Lord in your house, in your heart, I want you to repeat this prayer after me, and you say exactly what I say. And then, right, being a follower of Christ means you follow Christ, right? And it means usually that it's going to cost you something, right? If you have a Christianity that doesn't cost you anything, I don't think Christianity is what you actually have. You have something else that we we want to make it easier on people, right? What are your guys' thoughts on this? I see a lot of stuff that happens between preachers, and a lot of preachers are starting, and this isn't just Assembly of God. This actually comes out of a lot of the Reformed people, right? The Calvinists, Baptists, things like that they're really kind of breaking away from that, because they realize that, especially out on the mission field, if you go into a Muslim country and you accept Christ, that's not a, hey, let's make a decision one time and we're good. That means you can lose family, you can lose house, you can lose your life to make that decision. And so that becomes a lifelong commitment to do that, and your entire life changes. A lot of times in America, we sell a Christianity that looks, where if you just make the decision, we sign your name on a card and we turn that into the state office and say, we had, 73,000 saved and you know what I'm saying? We just get that little check off, and that's not what it's about, right? That it's about following Christ. So, just a little side note there. My note says, what does a church look like without administrators? And I think we saw that this week. So the strength of an administrator, they bring order, increase efficiency, reduce waste. Their weakness is that they can be task-oriented, meaning they're looking more at the task and not the people. Dawn's one of my administrators, aren't you, Dawn? Dawn, I'm going to pick on Dawn a little bit, because Dawn is the kind of person, if I set Dawn in a direction, whatever direction I set, she's gonna make that happen. Right? But Dawn might push you out of the way to get there. I'm just saying. Dawn might say, look, I've got a job, and this job needs to get done. Right? And that's good, though, because I know as the pastor, I put Dawn on it, it's going to happen. Now, there may be some bodies to hide later, but it's going to, right? I'm just joking. I'm just picking on you a little bit. But that's, that is a real strength of hers, is that, that administrative side that gets those things done. Trying to think who else do we have that was administrators? Anybody remember? Did anybody else remember getting that on your thing? I know Dawn did, Debbie did. I'm wondering if Pat did. No? Okay, she's shaking her head at me. And I'm going to believe her. So somebody who's got Acts 6, 1 through 7.
I do.
Go ahead.
And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples unto them and said, It is not fitting that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. Wherefore, brethren, look among you for 7 men of honest report, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to And the saying pleased the whole multitude. And they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenius, and Nicholas, a proselyte of Antioch, whom they set before the apostles. And when they had prayed, they laid their hands on them. And the word of God increased, and the number of the disciples multiplied in Jerusalem greatly, and a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith.
And there we have our first deacon board. Dun, 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 dun. Basically, they said they didn't. There was a difference between, and you'll find this, right? There's a difference between someone who's good at preaching and good at, rabble rousing and getting the mob going, and you know what I'm saying. There's the exciting, energizing person, and they're not always great at saying, let's make sure that all the widows are taken care of, and all this is taken care of, and all that is taken care of. And so they built the first deacon board. Now, I will tell you that the best deacon boards are going to be built out of people who have service, helps type giftings, right? Because the mindset of a deacon board should be the service of the people of God versus, like a pastor evangelist. That's why most of the time in churches, whether or not they're official, you usually have 3 different groups in leadership. You have your church board, which is your elected, official board. You have your elders, whether they're recognized or not. You have people in the church that are going to be in that church long term, right? If the pastor is absolutely terrible, preaches terrible every week, makes everybody mad, runs the whole church off, there are 10 people are still going to be there. And those are really your elders, because those are the ones that are going to stick with the church regardless. They're there because they're there for the church, regardless of who the pastor is. You know what I'm saying? They're there because they're committed to that local body. And that, as a preacher's kid, that was never us, right? As a preacher's kid, next assignment, next job, and then you're moving on. And then the third group is your staff, right? And your staff is going to be your ministry-type people. Actually, Debbie is a ministry-type person, even though she's an administrative person. What she does is directly involved in the ministry of the church, because there's different things when it comes to counseling or things like that Debbie manages and organizes, and so it's still a ministry position. So that's considered your staff. That's your youth pastors, children's pastors, senior pastors. When I say senior pastors, like senior adult pastors, things like that, right? So even if those groups aren't recognized in the church, every church I've been in has had those 3 groups, right? Anyone have any thoughts on administration? Tagline there is you're an engineer, right? Because you're building things, you're making things better. You know what the neat thing about all these skill gifts are? In Genesis 1:1, I think it reads, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. The earth was without form and void is not exactly what the Hebrew says, right? Because a lot of people will tell you, especially people that want to say, put evolution and creationism in a place where they can both exist together, instead of saying the earth was without form and void, you could actually translate that word was into became. The earth became without form and void. So there could have been a period of life where then all the life was destroyed. Some would say like when Satan was cast out of heaven and the earth was just kind of reset, and then so there's different theories about it. But what I really love is if you just read an actual transliteration word for word of that line, because keep in mind that the Bible assigns gender to things that we don't normally assign gender to, including things like the earth. And this is going to come important when we come down to celibacy. That's why I'm setting this up. And actually craftsmanship. Because we don't understand gender like God understands gender. I think our understanding of it. But the actual line can actually say, and the earth, she became chaos. And I love that thought, because when the earth becomes chaos, what does God do? He puts a gardener in place, right? He puts an engineer. Everything is chaotic. The earth just became chaos. The earth, she became chaos. And so God comes down and he starts to set everything over. He's the first gardener, right? Because he says, let there be light. There's light. He says, let there be this, let there be that. So he's setting all these things in order. He's setting up the structure. And then at the end of that, he sets man in the garden to take care of it. It's just an amazing picture when you think about it, of God setting everything in order and already showing us how things are going to work. And the reason I bring up gender is because when we get into some of these others, I'm going to show you how that plays into it. Because we in our society are so afraid of being labeled. If I say I'm a man, and being a man means I'm male and I'm masculine, and masculine has all these different words in my head attached to it, and me growing up, masculine may have meant something different than Kristen growing up, because my dad was very soft-handed with his kids, but her dad was more heavy-handed, so her masculine carries more authority than it does to me, right? Because my dad was, very, hey, do what you need, kids, and we'll support you, and her dad was, you will do, I am the man, right? And so we rebel against the idea that we have to be something, don't we? Just naturally, we rebel against the idea that if you're that, then you're going to have. Unfortunately, there are some things that we are born that we're going to fight that battle with, or we're going to learn to accept. And when it comes to things like that, I think in our society, we lie to people when we don't tell them that there's a value to being a man and there's a value to being a woman, and they are different and they're equal. It doesn't mean one dominates the other or one is better than the other, but they are different, right? So, craftsmanship. In fact, on craftsmanship, I put specialists up here because specialists is what we had. But my other two were a restorer or a gardener, because I like that same line. Because somebody with a craftsmanship skill, whether it's male or female, they are a restorer or a gardener. They're somebody who's bringing order into chaos. When a carpenter is good at carpentry, he's building all these little angles and all these little dovetails, and he's creating all these little things that fit in. Have you ever seen, in fact, you know what, that cabinet is one of the first ones I've ever gotten. It was a solder set, right? And the solder sets are the ones you build yourself, but it actually had 2 dovetail joints that you hammered into it. I hadn't seen that before. They just used, they always use the screws and stuff like that. That one actually came with 2 dovetail joints. You know what dovetails are. You're nodding. So a dovetail joint looks like a bow tie, right? And basically, you build a piece of wood like this, right? So that when the pieces of wood, they sit like this, but they don't connect. And the dovetail is a piece that fits that, and you hammer it down in, and then it's smooth. That's before they made screws, or in a place where metal was expensive and rare, right? If your metal was expensive and rare, carpenters were better at their job because they had to put it together. But the idea I love is that they're taking chaos and they're making something they're making order into it, right? They're putting order into that. So, somebody start us at Exodus 30. Actually, I'm going to read that because it's a long passage. Exodus 31, 1 through 11, if you want to read along. And it said, the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic design, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed him," go for it, "the son of Ahishamach of the tribe of Dan, and I have given to all able men ability, that they may make all that I have commanded you, the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, the mercy seat that is on it, and all the furnishings of the tent, the table and its utensils, the pure lampstand with all its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, the basin and its stand, and all the finely worked garments, the holy garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments of his sons for their service as priests, and the oil, the anointing oil, and the fragrant incense for the holy place, according to all I have commanded you, they shall do." So God says, "I filled these men with my Spirit so that they could do all these different things." Obviously, even in the list of things he's giving there, you have people that are building furnishings, right? Those are going to be your carpenters. You have people that are building the utensils, which are going to be your metal workers. You got people sewing the garments, those are going to be your tailors. And you have people who are mixing oils and incense, which are going to be kind of like your cooks, right? Because they know how to put the ingredients in there. Well, do you guys remember when we talked about the showbread, right? That when God is building the tabernacle, what is he actually setting up? He's setting up something that looks like a house, right? You've got a mercy seat, which is an actual chair, right? You've got the table of the showbread, right, which is an actual table that would have the loaves of showbread on it. You have a lampstand, right? So you can actually see where he's actually making something that would be like a living room, except this is a living, this is a place where God is going to commune with him. His Spirit's going to come down, but before he does that, he wants them to build all these things to exact specifications. So, for instance, when I'm asking Debbie earlier, or when I'm asking Pat, the next time I call you Deb, just smack me. Yeah. Your parents probably did that too, right? Yeah. Well, you could have been like my mom's parents. My mom's name is Brenda, and her sisters are Linda, Gwenda, Cinda, and Linda. Right. And I think that way they could just, slap whoever and call it even. So he's called of God to furnish a sacred place. I actually, and I'm picking on people by name tonight. That is just mean, isn't it? I like to run things by Pat because I understand that Pat, when she looks at the sanctuary, has a sense of it as a sacred place, right? And then Pat has a gift for decoration, and then when Pat doesn't, we were even talking about Ed, and I meant to tell Ed, I'll tell him to watch tonight, because Ed, when he paints something, he's painted a couple different things in the church, right? He has a sense of doing that for the Lord, and now he's added something of his artistic work to the church, and that means something to him, because he has a gift of craftsmanship, and anytime he's building something into the sanctuary, into the house of God, he has a real sense of that. Some people, when they're, and Bob and Glenda aren't here, but Bob and Glenda have that same sense when they're vacuuming the sanctuary, when they're cleaning up. There's that sense of when, and I love that Colleen sings the songs as she goes, because then there's a sense of adding music to it. And to me, I've told you guys this before, it's all like a guitar without a finish. When a guitar doesn't have that shellac on it, when it's just that regular flat-colored wood, and the wood doesn't have the finish on it, then when you play it, eventually the oil from your skin soaks into it and will change the tone of the guitar as you play it. It absorbs, and I always feel like God's house absorbs the essence of His Holy Spirit and of His people as they gather there, that there's that memory of what happened in this place. And the craftsmen are the ones that are building that place for God. And I didn't mean to leave you out, Paul, because I know you do stuff around the church too. And I can tell too, there's something in your spirit that connects with being able to do that. That you're not doing it, well, I think you do associate with doing it for the pastor, but even more so that you're doing this before the Lord, that I have a skill that I can do. Now, I will tell you this, and this is from being a husband, and I'll pick on Paul, because I know, I was talking to your plumber friend today, right? We were just kind of chit-chatting, because he's a good guy, and he's Catholic, but I'm trying to get him saved anyway. I kid. But we were talking about how, like his church, he does all the work and they do it for free because it's his church. We said if he ever goes to a church, he's like, they just expect you to do the work for free because it's a church. And I agree with him. If it's not your church, I'll give you all the good wishes, in the world, but sometimes it's hard to feed your family on good wishes, right? sometimes the light company doesn't take good wishes as payment. Yeah, you're in our thoughts and prayers. Well, I'm hungry, but you're in our thoughts and prayers. But sometimes, a husband will do this. He'll go to work, and at work, he's, just putting in all the energy to make this the best job and do the best he can, and he's just pouring his heart into that. And then when he comes home to the family, he just doesn't feel like doing it anymore. He's given the best of himself to the secular world, and comes home to the family, which is sacred, and has nothing to give them. Did you know men do that sometimes? We're only like 20% men tonight. Well, we're like, right? And women do it too, right? There are some times where you give the best of yourself not to the things of God, so that when you get to the sacred spaces, you don't have anything to do. And I have seen way too often in a church where we have used people with Paul's gifts, right? Because in the church, we know we got one guy that knows how to do these things, so every time something comes up, you go bang on that one guy. Ask Joe to fix your computer at home, and you're probably not the first person that's asked Joe to fix your computer at home, right? Because they have that skill. And that's actually one of the weaknesses of it, is that you can't often give your best labor to the world and not to the church, and to have any energy to give to the church when, like in your case, when your house wasn't even keeping water from the outside from getting in, which is kind of an important thing for a house to do. The strength, of course, is that it's a unique skill set. And I like that verse in the Bible that says, how beautiful the feet of those who bring good news. That you're bringing the good news, right? That you're doing that as an act of service. You're bringing something to somebody. And how beautiful you are in performing that act. I think of that when I'm thinking about craftsmen, when I'm thinking about people that are doing things, even when it's dumb stuff. I always say that in Bible college they don't teach anything about plumbing, and yet every preacher has to know plumbing at some point. Every preacher will be cleaning a toilet or unclogging a toilet or doing something that's completely out of the scope of theology, right? I mean, they don't teach a home. They need a home ec class in Bible college. I can tell you that, because there's stuff you just have to know, right? Like I figured out that, for instance, in our house, if you have a pipe that's coming out as a drainage pipe, it's not supposed to go into a smaller one. It's only supposed to go into a bigger one. If you put it into a smaller one, eventually that will wear down. More knowledge for my pastoral studies. So, somebody, those are both real. Somebody go to Acts 18. Let's do, somebody read Acts 18. Go for it. 2 and 3.
There he became acquainted with a Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently arrived from Italy with his wife Priscilla. They had left Italy when Claudius Caesar deported all Jews from Rome. Paul lived and worked with them, for they were tent makers just as he was.
They were tent makers. Can you imagine having a tent made by Paul? Do you hear something amazing historically? Did you know that glass was only ever invented once? Most inventions in mankind, if you talk about wheel, if you talk about just about any invention, even the light bulb, right? Thomas Edison invented it in America, but there was a French guy who was just that close to having it, but Thomas Edison got to the patent office before him. But almost every invention has been invented in more than one place at one time. Like writing came from different places, language came from different, except glass. Glass was only invented once, and the people that invented it were Israelites, Jewish people. And Jews, for the longest time, through the Middle Ages, were the only ones that knew how to work glass. And when they were talking about the Jews were expelled from Rome, the one thing that kept Jews alive through most of the Middle Ages, when, for instance, Jews would be killed by Christians for not converting, which is, kind of a bad mark against us, but, it was 1,500 years ago or so, so hopefully they'll let us off the hook by now. But one of the things that kept them alive is they were the only people that knew how to make and blow glass. So that craftsmanship skill that was only ever invented in one place in the entire world kept them alive through some of the worst times and kept them as a people. You know what I'm saying? I mean, imagine that. God gives you a skill. And for me it was computers, IT. For some reason, I could just look at a computer and fix it. I could just look at a system and, I don't even know how, right? I just do it. Sometimes I just pray over the machine and God shows me what to push. I don't know why, right? But there have been times where my family needed that, right? There have been times where, you know what I'm saying, they had to get me through some, you know what I'm saying? We always look down on gifts that aren't. Like if I tell you to be an evangelist, right, and you say, well, I'm not a good speaker, well, you don't always have to be, do you? Right? There are places you're going to go, right, fixing stuff for people, that you're going to talk to people that would never set foot in a church. Right? And the only reason you're there is because you have a skill they don't have, and they need you for that skill. Right? And we want to look at skills like this and say, well, that's not as, spiritual as, this gift of the Spirit, or I'm not calling down fire with it or whatever. But that skill takes you to places that you would never be without it, and allows you to talk to people that would never come in contact with the gospel, except that you have them. So the skill is using your hands and mind to benefit other believers through artistic, creative, or constructive works. Here's a question for you. What types of craftsmen do we need in the modern church? So as far as craftsmen in the church, okay, because all these are spiritual gifts, which means the church body needs them, right? And obviously in Israel they needed them, they had to build the things. So give me some, the easy ones are like, we need plumbers in the church, right? We need carpenters in the church, because sometimes we need painters in the church. That's, Uh-huh. You need cleaners in the church, yeah. Electricians. Plumbers. Yeah, you do. You need. Most churches now have media directors, right? Because not all pastors know how to, do their own streaming and stuff like that. So they've got to have somebody, because that helps spread the word. You've got to have somebody that knows how to perform that function, right? We in our, and this is very personal to me. My dad's one big. You know how you always want, I always wanted my kids to be taller than me. I know that's dumb, right? But I just do, right? And so far, so good. Tristan's almost there. He's the last one, and he's about to cross that mark. He's gaining on me every day. That's great. I love that, right? My dad's thing, though, was he didn't want me to work with my hands. My dad grew up in an age where he was doing back-breaking labor. He was pastoring a church and working three jobs. And one of those jobs, he was literally moving 50-pound sacks all day long. Right? So, he'd come in just beat to death, shower up, and then go preach. And I have no idea how the man did it, right? There were just some times where, he was doing what he had to do to keep going, and still at the same time being a pastor of a church, not a staff, but actually the head minister of the church, and still working, 1, 2, or 3 jobs, because, it might be a small church, they didn't have anything, he just did that. So his wish for me was always, that I wouldn't have to work with my hands. I wish he hadn't wished that so hard, or asked God for it so much, because sometimes I'd really like to have just a little bit more skill with my hands, because there are things I know I should know how to do, or I should be able to do, and it's just like, I'm just, dumb about it, right? But in my generation, that was a big thing, right? In the American generation that I grew up in, we tend to look better on people that didn't work with their hands than people that did. Would you guys agree or disagree? Right? There's even that whole blue collar, white collar, and if you're blue collar, you're on this side, and if you're white collar on this side, you're not as smart as the white collar people. You're not as, you know what I'm saying? Why do you think we developed that mentality? Well, first off, do you think it's a good or a bad one? Yeah, I think it stands on its own. And it's not. It's really something that we developed. Somehow in our minds, we decided that, right? And I guess it was because, as America was changing, the higher paying jobs, right? Because what's our biggest idol in America? Money, right? If we get down to this one, oh my gosh, we're going to go to town, right? Our biggest stumbling block in this country is the love of money, right? I mean, just the thing that we have to overcome all the time is money, right? Our politicians will do anything for it. Our companies will, knife over anybody they got to make a little bit more of it. And then we, even as a society, look at somebody and we say, if you make this much and I make this much, you must be better than me, right? You must be a better person than me because why would you be making more money? We associate blessing instead of, right? We consider it the blessing of God if somebody makes more money than us. Well, who are we serving there, right? Man, here's the thing that people miss when they don't work with their hands. And I think you probably know this, Mona. You work in the garden because it clears your mind, right? There's something about this. When I was in the Navy, I was in satellite communications. But every now and then, if you know what a resistor is just a little piece of electronic component, but it has a ring on it. It has several rings on it. And they tell you how much resistance they have. And every now and then, when the stress was just getting to me and everything, I would just go in there, start sorting them by colors and put them in the right. We had this huge bin of them. And I would just start sorting them, right? Because okay, this one is this much. And just because there was something about that just clears your mind, right? Part of the reason why we are so stressed and sick is because we have jobs where we sit down all day with people throwing information at us and us spewing information back out, and we're not doing anything with our hands, and we're not doing anything physical, and that actually stresses you more than if you were doing something physical. Because your body wants to respond by doing so, right? I think that plays in, because when you can do something, that's what I love about gardening. That's why guys work on cars, right? Because there's something about taking it apart and cleaning it and putting it back together, and it just clears your mind. The whole time, your mind is thinking and you're processing and you're figuring stuff out, right? But there's something about that motion, moving. They say that we underestimate our sense of touch, right? We understand hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting. But if you hold something heavy, you're better at making and processing you're better at processing information holding something heavy in your hand. I used to keep little heavy, those little concrete balls and things like that, and just throw them back and forth because just having that motion, that's why I like holding my Bible when I'm reading it. That's why I like books instead of digital books, right? I think that's why they actually make Kindles and Nooks. They put a little weight in them. They put a little bar of weight in them because they want you to feel it. So it feels heavy, so it feels substantial to you. There you go. Yeah, this is just what God was putting on my heart today, right? Because we talk about the earth she became chaos, and then He puts a gardener in there. And I don't know why this is what's on my mind today, but it is. So you guys are here to, say, hey, you're just way off, Pastor, right on, Pastor. Either way, I'm fine with either of them. In our society, we have we have. Somebody explained to me, I don't know how to get your thoughts out of your head. I want to get your thoughts out of your head. I'm trying to think about the best way to do that. Let's pick on Nicole. Yes. How is a woman different from a man? Give me, not physically. Without describing a physical attribute, how is a woman different from a man?
Think differently.
They think differently. How would a woman think about things differently than a man would? Give me a...
I think most women think more relationally.
Relationally,
Yeah,
they make connections over things.
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like different things connect to them. So you could complain about one thing. Hey, Kristen and I joke about this.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen does tend to internalize. So I may think I'm complaining about something, but what she's actually hearing is, I don't love you, honey, because you're bad at this. That's, I think I'm saying, I wish this was done different. To me, that's how it's coming out of my mouth. But in her ear is, you must be mad at me about this. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes because women make more connections with things, right? Where a guy might just look at it and say, well, this is the actual thing you said. I'm just going to take that. A woman actually takes in, I would say.
I had watched this comedian once that did it really interestingly. The comparison between a man's brain and a woman's brain.
Mhm.
The man has a whole bunch of separate little boxes.
Right. And
You
with a
got
woman,
the house box and the white box, and the woman just has one box and everything is in
and
one
everything's
box.
in it. And you know what? Here's something too, though, because we're going to tie this to spiritual giftings as we go on. I'm trying to tie it to studies that I know. This isn't something I know scientifically. This isn't something anybody's proven, right? But I believe that women take in more information from their environment than men do, right? Same way, I've used this illustration before about Kristen, that we bumped into somebody at a Walmart, and Kristen says something about, I'm sure now that she knows, that we were getting, it was when she was pregnant with Tristan and she had the pregnancy test in the cart because we didn't know yet, right? So we were getting it, bump into somebody from church at the cart, where it's like, oh, how's it going? Didn't bump cart. We just, walk by them, oh, hey, how you doing? Yeah, it's just right after church. So, 3 lines of pleasantries maybe, and kept going. And she's like, well, now she knows that we're pregnant and she's going to tell everybody. And she's like, well, how she knows? She's like, well, the test was in there. And I was like, well, I didn't see everything in her cart. She's like, well, I did. Right? They immediately bump, and in just a couple of lines of text, they both completely inventoried everything else that's going on with the person. Right? That's why when we say that women dress up, they don't dress up for men, they dress up for other women, right? Because a man doesn't always notice how you did your nails or how your makeup is blended or, what kind of shoes you have on, but a woman bumps into another woman, and they immediately assess all that information. I've sat in people's houses, and Kristen's like, oh, you got to see their house? I was like, yeah. She's like, what color's their couch? I'm like, I have no idea. Were you sitting on their couch? Yes. I was not sitting on the floor. I have no idea what the room looks like, right? When we talk about... Here's another thing about women versus men. A man will generally tell you... I don't know how to really phrase that. I mean, you guys have heard the phrase "the secret garden," right? That's always used in reference to a woman, though, right? That the women have the secret garden, the secret places. There is a mysteriousness to the feminine that there isn't necessarily to the masculine, right? Whereas nobody's ever like, well, we just don't understand men, because usually a woman can figure out what a man's up to, right? But you turn that around, and even women sometimes don't understand other women, right? Other women come into contact with each other, and it's like that's why they say dogs are men and cats are women, because if a dog wants to go outside, the dog just goes up to the door and wags his tail. You let him outside, and he's happy. Then he comes back in, right? The cat will go to the door and ask to go outside. And you open the door, and the cat will walk away from the door and go to the kitchen. Like why, right? There's a secret. There's a hiddenness to being female that is special, right? And this is one of my problems with when we in our society, we try to cast off gender roles, or we say men and women are exactly the same and there's no difference. In fact, the big saying, in the 70s was that the only difference between men and women is, we give boys the war toys and the blue things, and we give girls the Barbie dolls and the pink things. But what they found out when they tried to make toys that boys like for girls is that nobody bought them, right? And then even if you raise a boy in an entirely feminine environment, he still comes out with masculine characteristics, almost as if they were pre-programmed to be masculine. Now, we all have things that we're pre-programmed to deal with that we don't necessarily want to deal with, right? We talk about being born this way. I was born an adulterer, right? But I have kept that behavior completely under control for 20 years. That's just how it is, that we are born with certain proclivities to things, but that doesn't mean we're bound to what we're born by. But at the same point, we're getting way too off craftsmanship, but this was just where I was going with it when I was there, is that The idea of a husbandman. In my head, that if I were a perfect husband, if I were absolutely everything Kristen needed for me to be as a husband, then what I would be is, I would be that when Kristen becomes chaos, when all the information that she takes in and all the things overwhelm her, I would be the one that would come in and restore order in her life as a gardener does to a garden, right? Because you come into the garden and you don't just start throwing seeds in the ground, do you? You clear the ground, right? You got to clear out all the weeds first. You've got to till the ground. And after you plant stuff, you don't just walk away from it, do you? You go back, and every day you're back in that garden and you're just checking on things and you're pulling out weeds and you're managing. Is the soil too dry? Do I need to add water to it? Things like that. The perfect man would be a gardener for the woman, right? That he would take the parts that are chaos and he would tend to them, right? As somebody who wanted to see it grow. One of my biggest problems when I see men and women in a marriage relationship is if the man doesn't tend to the wife, right? That if the wife needs healing, because let's be honest, this world is not nice to women. Amen? I mean, it's not. It's a hard, rough place. And that secret, delicate, beautiful thing about a woman, the world is always trying to sully that. It's always trying to defile that. It's always trying to break that. But a perfect man would be a man that when he is joined to a woman, becomes a gardener who wants to see her grow, and he manages the weeds, and he steps in. And see, you can't make anything grow, can you? You can't. You put the seed in there, you can give them everything right. I am terrible at watermelon, right? I don't know why. That one thing I can grow anything. I mean, I put it in the ground and it springs forth, and I raise my hand and life exists, right? That's how, except watermelon. I'm terrible at that. I remember the first time I had a watermelon, this thing was 70 pounds. It was huge. I mean, all my strength just to put it on the table. When I cut it in half, it was white all the way through. I was so mad. So then I read a book and it says you got to plug a watermelon so you know when they're ripe, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to plug this thing. So I go out and I do a little plug thing, and okay, it's still white, so I put the plug back in. The next day I come back and there's flies around it. I've killed that watermelon now by plugging it incorrect. I don't even know what plugging. I still don't, right? As a man, when you have a woman in your life, you are going to have to figure out sometimes what it's going to take for her to grow spiritually. You're going to have to figure out, and unfortunately it's going to be trial and error, right? And sometimes you're going to think you've done everything, and she, and it's still not. But you have to be that husband. The husbandman, that idea of being the person who tends to that. Now we're going to go right into celibacy after this, and this is actually going to dovetail very nicely if I've got time. Because when we get into the gift of celibacy, one of the things I knew when this was on, because we have two different spiritual gifts inventories. One has it, one doesn't, right? And these two gifts, I have never got to see anybody who was excited to have them. I've never been, man, I hope I rock the celibacy one. I hope I just, knock it out of the park. I hope that's right where I'm at. Or voluntary poverty, man, I hope God wants me to be poor. That would be just terrific if that's where I'm going to be, right? Those aren't ones that we normally look for. But the thing about celibacy, and I say this jokingly, that Kristen and I have this understanding that if she dies, I will have to find someone else. I won't survive on my own. You guys will find me starving to death, and But if I died, Kristen would be all right. You know what I'm saying? Kristen would probably be okay. She's more self-assured in herself, right? That she can be alone. And can I pick on you, Mona? Because I know that you went through some stuff in your life, right? But part of going through that made it okay when you got to that point where it had to be just Mona and God, right?
And there's alone, there's lonely.
There's lone and there's lonely, exactly. And somebody who's good at this knows how to be alone without being lonely, right? Without it eating at it, without it being a thing where, oh my gosh, I've got to find that next person to fill that void, or I've got to have somebody else to sit in this space if someone's not sitting in that space. I mean, I was so messed up as a teenager, I thought that if I didn't have a girlfriend, right, then something was wrong with me, right? Because that was just, I don't know how that got in, but a lot of people are like that, right? A lot of people are just, if I don't have that other person, then what's wrong with me that I don't have that other person? But let's go to 1 Corinthians 7. Well, let's go to Matthew 19, 10 through 12 first. This is probably the least preached about verse in the entire Bible. Actually, no, it's probably about the fifth least. Who's got it? Somebody read it for me again. Matthew 19, 10, 11, and 12.
There is an exception to some of that, and that is if they can't decide what the goals are, that's what they're turned over so that they may be destroyed. That's openly stated.
We'll work our way to that. You got it, Casey?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Turned over that.
His disciples say unto him, if the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. But he said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were born from their mother's womb. There are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it.
Okay, so it says there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, there are eunuchs who have been made so by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let's look at one of the last category in 1 Corinthians 7, 6 through 8. And this one you probably have heard before. This is Paul talking to the Corinthian church. Keep that verse in your head, though, that some eunuchs are born eunuchs, some are made eunuchs, and some for the kingdom of God become eunuchs. You guys don't need me to go into what a eunuch is, right? Please say no. So somebody read that, 1 Corinthians 7, 6 through 8.
Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am. But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am.
Okay, and then verse 9 is, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Which again, it's that whole, can they set aside relationships for the sake of the mission? The three types of eunuch that Jesus says is some are born eunuchs, meaning some people are just born and they're just happy not being in relationships. They're just happy not being taken over by that side.
Sometimes I just burn with barbecue.
Sometimes we burn with barbecue. I'm not going to use that humor, John. I'm with you, though. I put the word devoted when I put celibacy because there's so much that goes into this. There's so much that goes into this that in the ancient world they understood that some people, like we don't have nuns in the Pentecostal tradition. But I can tell you that all through history, every type of religion across the world generally comes up with some place where they have women who are devoted to the service of God and take it, you know what I'm saying? I think the Catholic Church has good ideas on some things. I think one of their biggest problems is, well, bureaucracy is their number one problem. There's just too many bureaucrats in the organization. But two, they tend to formalize things into a religious point until it loses its actual spiritual significance, right? I was talking to somebody, this is actually, we were talking about Lutheranism and how Lutherans receive communion every Sunday, right? In the Lutheran Church. Right, at one of the services. And because I was talking to somebody about that, and I understand that, and I've been in churches where they do that. One of my things, though, is I always want communion to be special. And I always feel like if I did it every week, you know what I'm saying, that it would lose that, because I always want it to be an event. I want it to be a thing that happens. We're going to take communion now, and I want there to be a setting aside of the heart so that we can have that moment. Sometimes we do things that are meant to have a spiritual significance, but we beat the Holy Spirit out of it. You know what I'm saying? We just beat it to death until there's I don't mean to pick. I'm not. You know what I'm saying? I'm not implying that. But it's an example where you could do that if you took it too far. Sometimes we would take things like, for instance, there are some churches that you can only sing certain songs. Like it's not even a matter of hymns versus choruses. They have a liturgy, and you can only follow the liturgy, and you can only sing these songs on these days, because somewhere at some point somebody wrote a list and said, these are the songs that we sing on these days, and we don't sing any other songs, right? Just beat the ever-loving inspiration out of that thing. So you never have that, kind of flow of the Spirit, that kind of move, that kind of, hey, let's change the order and let's just do something, right? Like I show up on a Wednesday night, and I'm just going to pick up the guitar, and we're going to sing a song, And we're just all, because that's just the song that's in our, And if somebody says something, like if I'm planning the songs for the week and I hear somebody singing a song or somebody mentions a song, a lot of times I'll see if I can work that in. I'm like, well, maybe the Lord brought that for a reason. Let's do it. Or this week, I planned on doing a song, and then Colleen comes in and she's cleaning and she's singing that song or humming that song as she's cleaning. And I'm like, well, there's a good confirmation of that. So the reason I say all that is because when we talk about celibacy, we talk about somebody who's devoted to the Lord, that somebody sets aside relationships, because let's be honest, relationships are distracting, right? The reason Paul says that he would have everybody be like him in celibacy is he says, for the sake of the gospel, because then he can preach, he can devote himself to the work of the Lord, and he doesn't have to worry about raising a family, he doesn't have to worry about, oh my gosh, Gareth is up another shoe size. We have to go find a way to get him even bigger shoes. At some point, there's going to be skis, and he's just going to ski in, right? I'm kidding with you, buddy. So, he says that. The thing is, and this is what the world doesn't get, celibacy and poverty are both freedom gifts. And what I mean is that in both of these situations, we'll go into this one more next week, because we're obviously going to be out of time, that when you have the gift of celibacy, and sometimes it is a natural gift, right? That some people are just born, and it's just never. I had a friend in the Navy, and that was just him. He was just kind of happy, hanging out, and just never. I think he eventually did get married, but really his personality, I think he probably got married just because, somewhere on his list he needed to check it off. But he was really just kind of happy, being himself and not having another person there. There's a certain type of freedom you have when you're not obsessed with that thing. In our culture, we're so obsessed with money, and what's our second one? Sex, right? Close your eyes, close your ears, Tristan. Money and sex are two big sins, and I would say in that order, right? Because nobody writes a rap song about being content in your circumstances. All my bills are paid and I'm fine at home. They're pouring out the expensive champagne. You know what I'm saying? We don't idolize people who are living a comfortable existence out of debt and free of those sorts of mourning. But people who understand how to be free from money, that's a freedom gift because they're free from that. Celibacy is the same thing. They're free from that constant. In our society, it is always banging at your door. You can't watch commercials. You can't listen to the radio. At some point, the advertisers decided sex sells, and so everything we do, we're going to put some sex in there, so they'll be like, you know what? Our candy bar is better because somebody good-looking is holding it, right? I mean, Hardee's, I don't even eat at Hardee's anymore because of their commercials, right? I'm like, I don't need a girl in a bikini to tell me whether or not your burger is any good. You know what I'm saying? I'm either going to eat your burger and I'm not, and you can put, whoever you want eating it. It doesn't make me want that anymore. And in fact, I get turned off by that because why, do you have to put that before our eyes all the time? And yet our society is so obsessed with appetite. Right? When we talk about a consumer mentality, we're talking they want to build up your appetite. You have to have this thing. They are literally telling you when you see these commercials, if every time you don't open a Sunkist, if a beach party doesn't just burst out around you, I've never had that. Like those Pepsi commercials and just dancing in the streets when I open a can of Pepsi and we're just, woo, right? But they're trying to convince you that you have to have that craving, that need, that appetite. You have to have it filled, and if there's not, there's something wrong with you. Is it any wonder why we have such messed up views about sex and money in our culture when we're telling everybody it's an appetite, and if you're not consuming and doing as much of it as you can, there's something wrong with you. Celibacy is a freedom gift because that person who the Lord has done that in their heart understands now that no other relationship is going to make me more complete, right? We used to say 2 half people will make each other whole, and that's not true. They will fight. Right? Because both of them are looking for the other person to meet a need, and they both want, it's your turn to meet my need. No, it's your turn to meet my need, and they're just going to fight at each other. That you have to have somebody. In fact, I always say that when I met Kristen, I literally had taken a vow with somebody not to date for 3 months because it'd been something on our hearts. We've been talking about it. I'm like, you know what? I'm fine with that. I am fine with not dating anybody because I'm fine with God not putting. I'd gotten to that place in my life where I was finally okay, just being David, right? And then the Lord spoke to my heart as I took that vow, you're going to meet your wife before this is over. I really feel like the other person thinks I cheated on that, right? Because, Before 3 months in, I met Kristen. A month later, we were married, so I made it 4 months in. But it really was, to me, that ability to, because when I took that vow, it was nothing to me to say, you know what? I don't need that in my life. I don't need a dating relationship. I don't need a person in here to complete me because God has completed me. And I'm okay, being in the ministry, being in my life, doing those sorts of things. And then kind of when you finally get to that point, God's like, okay, well, guess what? I found the absolute most beautiful, perfect person in the world, and just gives them to you out of the blue. Just dropped out of the sky, literally. In an orange skirt. I always remember, right? Okay, she was on the front row in an orange skirt. How do you miss that? How was I on the stage? I don't know. I always was. Something about me, I always end up on the stage. So the strength is that person stands well alone. They are mission focused. They can have a mission, and they don't necessarily need someone else in their life to complete them to get that thing done. They're okay. The weakness is that sometimes they have trouble making those connections because they have trouble receiving help because they get to the point where I can do everything. I could joke on you, Mona, about picking up heavy stuff. Can I pick it up for you, Mona? Mona's like, no, I got it. Okay. She'll kick me in the shins. So there's the question. Does God want everybody to be married? No.
I don't have to, they just look at me wrong.
And some were born that way. Some were born using. Some were
built in.
there was a song by a guy named Steve Taylor called Bouquet. And the song has some of the saddest lyrics because it says, she said, I do where the lonely give in. Right? That she met somebody and finally she was lonely enough that she said I do to that person because she just didn't want to be lonely anymore. And guess what happens by the end of the song, right? Because she keeps telling herself in the song, well, God must want it this way because this person's in my life. But really, she was reading it as God wants it this way because she really wanted God to want it that way. Right? And so she said, I do where the lonely give in. And then little by little, she notices that they see each other left. They're growing apart because really they're two half people in love and they're not making each other whole. Instead, it's just tearing them further up because, again, you have to have some measure of this gift in your life. Even if you're married, you have to have some measure of that. Because if you don't have some measure of this gift, you are going to be a life-sucking force to whoever you're married to. I'm just saying, if you don't have some sense of being able to exist as a person and minister to somebody independent of a relationship, you will be a life-sucking force to somebody. Just, there you go. I'm getting a lot of stares on that one. And Krista will tell you, there are some times when I come home and I'm a life-sucking force. I'm like, come on, you gotta pay attention to me, And she's like, no, I'm doing this. I'm like, no, come on, just spend time together. She's like, no. Because sometimes you got stuff to do, right? You want someone to meet that emotional need. But there has to be some part of you. It's like when a baby has to learn how to self-soothe. Why do you let a baby sleep by itself overnight? Because at some point, the baby has to learn how to calm itself down and how to relax itself. It's actually a skill the baby has to learn physically. And we have to learn it emotionally at some point to be able to let other people, to not be looking for someone else to do the things for us that God wants to do for us or that God wants us to learn to do for ourselves. That we have to have some measure of this, something in our life that's devoted. Because again, if you don't have any part of your life that is so devoted to God that no one else has any input into it, finish the sentence. If you don't have that part of your life that is sacred and wholly devoted to Him, people won't respect you. You know why? And this is the worst thing I see. Is when I see a woman who's sexually promiscuous, it's almost always because some sort of trauma happened where she felt like her ability to be pure was taken away, and so it doesn't matter now what she does. She no longer has that devoted part that she can say is sacred and holy. And sometimes there's a healing that has to happen so that person can have that back and understand that they are sacred and holy before the Lord. And even if somebody at some point forcibly took that sacredness away, that God can restore that. Amen? And that gets us at 1 minute left. Anyone have any comment on all of that? I know it was deep and heavy. Here's my last question for you. How do we as a church view people who choose celibacy? You know what? We view it the same way we view people. If we know somebody who willingly lives below their means, how do we view them? Do you know what? You know what somebody told me once that just blew my mind? Did you know what we should be able to say in church? If it's Sunday and somebody says, I'd like to go out to eat with you, you should be able to say, it's not really in my budget, or I don't have money for it right now, and not feel weird.
All I do is I say, I want popcorn, and then they go run for it.
There you go. But we have that image of people in our church, right? That if they make a choice, which is actually a godly choice, it's actually a freedom from appetite. There's actually something there that's more complete than those of us who are so consumed by appetite that if you're not, you know what it is, right? Because whenever you have a problem with a sin, you assume everybody else does. Did you know that? Did you know that? If you're trapped in a specific sin, you assume that everybody else is trapped in that sin. You just do. It's called projection. People do it. And that's... So we'll start next week on poverty. I put a link up on Facebook to the life of Rich Mullins. If you watch that, Rich Mullins wrote the song "Awesome God." He wrote that song. Oh God, you are my God. He wrote that. He wrote "Sing Your Praise to the Lord" for Amy Grant. And if you can watch that video, it's kind of long. I think it's 30 minutes long or something like that. But he was somebody who lived voluntarily poor his whole life, even though he made tons of money, and just kind of watch that, and it'll give us some good discussion next week. Although I know I didn't do much discussion this week. That's how it happens sometimes. Casey, lead us out in prayer, please.
Father, we just thank you and praise you that we can sit here at your feet and